So, hi everyone. Welcome to the panel discussions of machine learning career. And today, my name is Chip. I'm a co-founder of a small machine learning startup called Claypot AI. So I do care a lot about the topic because both as a job seeker and a employer. So previously in my first job, when I was looking for my first machine learning job, I did ask like a lot of people for advice and I ended up writing a book on a machine learning interviews. And now we're actually hiring and we do see a lot of interesting patterns with the resumes and categories we see. And with me today, we have two really great panelists. So Gourab is the VP of Customer Success and Machine Learning at a company that you probably have heard of, like Waves and Biases. He supports the customer success organizations and the customer-facing machine learning engineering team at Waves and Biases. And before that, he was at Meta. And his team, FYI, is actually hiring for customer-facing machine learning engineer, and I can go more into that. And the other person is somebody I really admire and also a good friend. He's a Han-chung Lee. He is a director of machine learning at Moody. And so he's on our Discord. And recently we has a survey on like who is the most helpful community member, and Han got the highest number of like nominations. So he is extremely active and has a lot of community members in their job search. So okay, so we're gonna start. Is there anything that Gaurav and Han want to add?
No, thanks, Chip, for having me on the panel.
Um,
Thank you for the generous introduction.
okay, so cool. So you both have like incredible amount of experience and you've been in the industry for a while. So I'm curious, is like what are some of the changes in the machine learning slash data science career you have seen in the last few years? So Gaurav, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chip, for that. Yeah, very interesting question because so I started my career as a statistician, and back then we didn't even popularize the term data scientist as much. And course of some period of my career, suddenly people started calling me data scientists, and now probably people start calling someone like my background more machine learning engineer or not, depending on where I land. I think in the like about I would say 8 to 10 years ago, we saw a big consolidation in terms of roles under this data science terminology, right? We used to have data analysts, business analysts, all these different terms, statisticians before. Then we introduced data scientists as someone who probably does a little bit more coding than a data analyst will do. And then suddenly that term is becoming a more standard or became more standard in the course of last, I would say, 5 or 6 years. And now, like, you won't even hear data scientist or data analyst or business analyst role as a role anymore. It's like different flavors of data scientist now. And the same time,
Yes,
I
the
think
engineers now.
yeah, exactly. And then last 4 years, what happened in parallel is the data scientists who code started separating themselves from data scientists and started calling themselves as ML engineers. And because they are writing codes, and software engineers who are now productionizing those ML models are also calling themselves ML engineers. So we are kind of like in the cusp of this two cluster, if you bimodal distribution of these data scientists who are still focusing probably more on tabular or traditional ML problems, and then machine learning engineers who are focusing probably some time on tabular, but also a lot of time in other type of modality of problems, and much more coding and engineering culture oriented. Han, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think back, I would say back in those days, back in the old days, it was data mining, and then it gradually evolved into big data, then data science. Now we have machine learning, and then generative AI. And one trend I do notice that is that the industry is still incredibly young. So whatever terms that we speak of today is likely going to be obsolete in a day, maybe a quarter, maybe in a few years. And what there are certain things that doesn't change where we are seeing, I guess on my end, is that the field of data science slash machine learning is being going into different niches. So there's a good chunk of tabular data. There's going to be a good chunk of text related data and different modalities, etc., etc. And usually when people hire, they do tend to hire people with somewhat prior experience or prior projects for that special modality. Sometimes it could be multimodal modeling as well. So everything is still moving. It's evolving fairly fast at the moment. So yeah, it's fairly interesting
I see. So just
times.
to summarize, so you both think there's like there's a divergence, right? Like there's one groups that focus on tabular data, so for use case like fraud or ETA estimations. So for that use case, like seem like the focus is gonna be on feature engineering and future computations, whereas for the unstructured data use case like NLP or computer visions, it's more like so like feature engineering is pre-automated, right? It just inputs the raw data, get back embedding. So the focus is more on like infrastructure, how to optimize this like model to like inference fast and understand business use cases.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think so. Weights and biases, where I am currently working, our majority of our users are actually deep learning ML developers. So we'll probably form more under this multimodal world, and they are using either NLP or they are using images or videos or reinforcement learning or some other modalities of data, and it's a completely different world. Where I used to work before Weights and Biases in Data Robot, that is much more focused on this tabular data. It's a completely different world there. These two languages are almost different. There are overlaps, like fraud problem that you mentioned, Chip, does have now more NLP kind of treatment on those fraud data. If you have the transaction details and stuff, we are seeing use of more NLP type of. So we do have customers who are still using and starting to use more and more multimodal element in the tabular data. But the way to think about it is kind of different. In the traditional tabular data, you're almost always thinking about how to look at the data and massage and prepare it for whatever model. The models are almost commoditized, and you're not spending as much time on tuning those models. You're trying to really make sense of the features. And then the machine learning engineering world, where it's all about this image and other things, as you mentioned, the feature engineering is already done, or the model is kind of thinking about it. You're focusing much more on the tuning and iterations of the model and resources available to the model and how to efficiently use those, and a completely different set of problems in my mind.
I see. So I'm curious, like, what is a breakdown of like tabular versus like unstructured data use cases that you have seen?
Yeah, for tabular data, I think what I would classically call tabular data is where you have a table of numbers and you're primarily using numbers. And there are, of course, variations of that on top of that that started using some text column added to it or something else added to it. But largely it's numbers, maybe with some text. And in that world, I think the use cases will fall under that is like classic customer churn use cases, right? Like pretty much all companies, all organizations, B2Cs at least, are all doing that. Any sort of product analytics that relates to predicting engagement, predicting retention, that are all kind of related to that. Any sort of like time series forecasting type of use cases that are more around like numbers, series of numbers, and I'm forecasting the next set. Fraud, any like a standard classification regression where we are fraud or not fraud, should be underwritten or not, what is the loss, predicting that, loss given default or default rate in interest. All these in my mind, any health outcomes, predicting those where we have only kind of labs, measures, and things like that. I will fall all of those under more kind of traditional ML. Whereas on the other side, I would say much more around like generative AI, image detection, segmentation, that type of problem.
So would you say like half of the use cases are like structured data and half is like unstructured?
I would say it's varies based on the industry. If I look at the financial industry or fintech or even healthcare, I would say the majority of the use cases are with tabular data or more traditional ML. If I say high tech and or gaming or even retail and like where the large data volume is already available and multimodal data is already being collected, it is moving more towards more deep learning and more kind of multimodal modeling sort of problem. I don't
Yeah,
know if
so I'm
Han, you have
curious, Han.
seen.
Yeah.
I think it's that's the right observation as well. Traditionally, I think most companies are involved in the machine learning space or data science space are involved in tabular data because it is the only data that is easy to extract, count, validate, and even build machine learning models on top of it. And now, with the advances in deep learning, we are now able to utilize other parts of the data that's non-tabular, the unstructured data, including images, text, tables, etc., etc., which actually opened up a wide world of opportunities. Not even like excluding the generative AI stuff, right? And one of the things that do not change during this transition, there are a few things that will not change during this transition. One is, how do you measure the success of the model? How do you do a proper statistical testing, A/B testing, power law testing, etc., etc.? And the second is, how do you make sure that the models that you have created is producing the result that you promised, right? So these two skills does not exactly change, and they are deeply involved in the engineering process of, hey, we build a model and we want the model to behave as promised, and we need to know if the model breaks, so we can fix it one way or the other. So this more engineered approaches are staying relatively the same across different modalities, from tabular or to text or to multimodal models,
I see. So
in my opinion.
yeah, so like given these diversions, right? I'm curious, like from the data perspective, like do you think that they have to make the comment like, hey, I'm going to use tabular space, or I'm going to like unstructured space, or just going to the core skill set that I had mentioned?
Yeah, I'll go first. So I think it actually depends on your experience level and the opportunity that presents to you, right? So if you decide to specialize in any specific niche, then there is a higher risk, so to speak, of that niche become not too useful. Let's say, for example, if you were doing a lot of project and research on recurrent neural network, and nowadays everything is transformers, then it might not become that useful, even though a lot of the skill set can be are transferable. So personally, I would focus on the more transferable skill sets. For example, proper software engineering processes, how to monitor, how to statistical test, how to write your black box, white box test to ensure your models are performing okay, how to visualize, and also how to pitch and promote your ideas to get it working and get it accepted by the product management or other part of the community. So these core skills are going to be the same and should be, in my opinion, the focus, instead of focusing that say, hey, I am really good with tabular, which means nowadays XGBoost
Mhm.
everywhere, or I'm really good with generative AI, which nowadays means I can write different prompt to ChatGPT or Midjourney, right? So
Yeah, it's in my
that's
mind,
my
it's almost
opinion.
like the bias variance problem for ML, right? Like if you want to be very, very specific about one particular skill set, you probably start overfitting on that particular skill set, and your skill set don't generalize as much across the board. So I think it is like what I would agree with Han, pretty much everything he said. I think when you're beginning your career, the more general you can be about different type of use cases. But because even the most traditional tabular data shops are actually starting to experiment with deep learning and other methodologies, and that will just increase. So it's never going to be like, okay, that's what I will only do. And there are so many things available to learn all of these different things. Earlier stage, my recommendation is being more general. As you grow in your career, you probably have to choose a path where you really, really specialize, because that's what get the compensation increases and the higher levels in different organizations. Because after a particular level, people hiring managers are probably hiring for a very specialty background. Like for example, in my team, when I started in the weights and biases, the most of the machine learning engineers in the team had computer vision background, and we are starting to see a lot more NLP customers. So one of the key thing that I was looking for at that point is someone who is coming in with NLP background. Now we have a little bit more balance of computer vision and NLP, and now I'm hiring for like someone who is probably a little bit earlier in their career. I don't really care if they're coming with a specific background. I don't even care if they're coming with no deep learning background, as long as they have done a project end to end, has the ability to present, has the ability to understand what exactly went into the data, into the model, into the problem, how to connect all of that and tell the story. I feel like they have the basic general skills to then pick up any other methodological improvements that they need to kind of explore more.
So Gourab, you mentioned something very interesting. It's like you're looking for like earlier in their career. So I do have a question. Like a lot of my friends I know, it's like in is this both right? Like, and there's a lot of companies they are hiring for senior role, but now they suddenly we feel like a lot of companies that traditionally employ a large amount of new grad, like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they have hiring freeze. So now all these recent grads like seem to be like struggling to find jobs. So I wonder like is that something that like you have seen or like what advice do you have for like recent grads to stand out in the market?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have two teams: support engineering and success machine learning engineer. Support engineering, we usually tend to hire more fresh out of the grad, when they are kind of like trying to get some experience. In our case, a lot of experience is customer facing, how to talk to customers, how to be applied. So support engineering is a good starting point for many of them, and then they gradually kind of like goes into more machine learning focused role. So what I definitely see a big sometimes gap in the early stage candidates is project experience, and it is a sort of a chicken and egg problem, because like how do you get project experience without getting a job or internship? So which one starts? But I do think the people who stand out, I see a lot of self motivated kind of finding things and then like actually doing it and then kind of describing those projects in really great detail. And sometimes they are not even that fancy of a project, but taking something from a germination of an idea and then all the way to the end where they at least have like a product to show, or at least some sort of like interface that they had thought of and they could talk through, is I think in my mind is the main differentiating factor. I don't care if they gotten like a lot of people I see, they participate in Kaggle and say, okay, I'm Kaggle X, or I have won like this competition, that competition. I'm not discounting that. But if I then start kind of thinking of asking them questions about like, okay, like how would you then now take this Kaggle project and kind of start thinking about what will happen in real life, and can start seeing whether they can think about the real life and at least ask questions to kind of understand how those projects will be actually applied. That's the differentiating factor. And even if you did a simple project, I remember I hired someone fresh out of grad in data robot in a machine learning data science role, and this person came from a sales background, but on his own, he was doing some like quantitative trading type of things on his own, just looking at the open source data. He was kind of building some models, making some decisions, and that's entrepreneurial. And that I don't care if he didn't do the computer science grad experience. On his time, he built that model, made some product out of it, made some business decision out of it. I will pick that person any day for a machine learning role. And I think that's the major gap that I see in a lot of the new grads that are struggling probably to find their ideal role.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I've seen the same thing where two, if let's say if you're a new grad and you want to make yourself stand out or your portfolio more robust, is definitely the drive and the entrepreneurial spirit to work and take projects, personal or collaborative projects from end to end, not just Kaggle competitions, but actual projects. Deploy something to an API that people can call.
Streamlit.
Yeah.
With yep, and Streamlit. Yeah,
Streamlit.
Streamlit's
Yeah, right.
great,
There's
right?
so many tools
Radio,
there. Yeah.
yeah, right. And especially nowadays, there are tons of different machine learning projects, and there are different tools to help you accelerate how to build those projects using, let's say, GitHub Copilot or whatever else other tools that you can find. And there are actually quite a few prominent figures in the machine learning community that did not come from a machine learning background or doesn't have a PhD in statistics or in physics, right? So a lot of it is definitely achievable, and it's just spend your time taking things from end to end instead of uh, do a project halfway through and sort of give up on it, which I know it's that part is hard, but having the grit to take one thing um, down, take a project from end to end,
Yeah.
that would show that you have you have the drive, and you have the drive and the determinations to work in the industry instead of just showing that, hey, this is, I guess, a hot industry you want to get in for whatever reason, and
Yeah.
you do some class project, predicting stock price,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Or
or something
Titanic,
like
the
that, or the
famous
MNIST.
Titanic project. Okay, yeah.
Titanic, right, like those toy projects. Uh, it's not a good indicator. It's not a good indication of your willingness to work in the industry.
I see. So talking about hot industry, right? Hot field. You probably know where I'm headed. So generative AI. So I do see I do see a lot of people affected by the recent like layoff, hiring freeze, and they said it's like, okay, I'm gonna try to make it with generative AI, and then starting a company, building applications around this. And I wonder if you two have any thoughts around generative AI.
Yeah, I mean, weights and biases, it's kind of like middle of a big kind of like this storm in some ways, because I think we have like 9 out of 10 of the generative AI, like top companies are right now like using weights and biases some ways. So I feel like, okay, yeah, we are kind of like riding that hype cycle as well ourselves. But the way I see the market kind of like in the generative AI land separate is three distinct groups. So there is the OpenAIs of the world and Cohere and Aleph Alphas of the world that are building these large language models. For that, I think there is a very different type of skill set, and the problems are in a very different dimension altogether. I would say majority of them ML engineers are trying to get into that. Will probably have a very high skill bar, and they have to kind of like take a lot of risks into going in that direction to actually really be penetrating those companies. They're hiring a lot, but they will be hiring the top of the top for the level of scale and the dimensions that they're looking for. Then there is the middle that pretty much all industry right now, there is this thing about, okay, we will use the generative models, the foundation models, and we will tune it to our data and make it more relevant for us. I think that's where probably going to be next couple of years a huge hiring push, because everyone will be trying to kind of build their own customized version of it based on that. In that world, understanding the business knowledge and kind of like knowing what data sources to actually connect to actually tab. I'm just giving an example. We just released on Discord a new kind of a bot that we are using it for 1B or actually Databricks today talked about Dolly 2.0, which is tuned on their own instructions, their own documentations. And 1B Weights and Biases is doing something like that. I think there will be a lot of organizations that will be doing that. Salesforce has already done it and so on. I think, but knowing what is the database there, like for example, do you connect to the documentation? Do you connect to a knowledge base? Do you connect to the Discord chats? Do you connect to something else? How do you productionize that? And then do you create a bot in Discord? That will be the main peak of things for those companies. And then the third is even lower bar, like saying, I'm just going to use the API of OpenAI, but I will be building a product. Even they are hiring ML engineers, but there the problem is very specific. Get an API, but build a product around it. So it's almost more traditional software engineering to piece together different types of API to create a product. So that will be, I think, the more interesting skill set coming or looking for in some of those. Like Jasper is a great example that came out of that, but there's tons and tons of AI companies that are going to just use the API to build a product and say, call it generative AI for X, and then build a compelling product experience for it.
Yeah, I can see why you're the VP of like customer success. You're very good at like selling with investors, which is pretty cool. So one thing that stood out to me is just like maybe a lot of company been thinking about like how to serve those like AI, generative AI bots, right? It seems to be like being able to build Discord bot seems to be could be a fun skill set for people looking for a job. So Han, I wonder if you have anything to add to what Gourab just said.
I think what Gross said, it's characterized the current trend um, perfectly. There is the people that's building the foundation layers, and then there's the application there, and then there's the actual building the wide, I guess, the app store type of applications. And the skill demanded is going to be fairly different across the board in terms of the specialized knowledges. And there are still things that don't change between the three.
Yeah.
How do you write your proper code? How do you test? How do you create the proper abstractions? How do you engineer and architecture your software so different people can work at different pieces without breaking each other? And how do you optimize certain things?
Yeah.
And most importantly, how do you measure and track and monitor what is actually going on? Because with generative AI, there is a new sort of risk where in the old days we have SQL injections. Now there is prompt injections where people try to hijack your model. So all those interesting facets are coming to life under our very own eyes. So you'll be very interesting to see where things go going forward. But if you're a new grad, and you have not played around with any of the APIs, in my opinion,
Yeah.
you should.
Mm.
It's I wouldn't say it's the future, but it is
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
I would say like
So
if our CEO is playing with OpenAI API for the last like few weeks, I played with a little bit, like, and I'm not even in a technical role anymore. So if you're a new grad and you have all these different technologies, you're so empowered to build whatever you want to be in that world.
So, so I do have a follow-up question because you both keep talking about like looking for people with a good understanding, like a good business sense. So, how do recent grad acquire that business sense? Like, should you take like MBA or like how do they gain that?
Yeah, that's why I said it's a chicken and egg problem, because like, how do you get business sense without ever working? So I think business sense, when we say business sense, it's kind of like this, like, I don't think it's like a degree related. Frankly, if you ask any MBAs, like, did you get business sense from MBA programs, they will probably say
They were
no.
born with it. Yeah.
They just went with it, and they probably got networking, which is a different value
Mhm.
proposition. I think business sense is more about problem framing and understanding the different connections and stakeholders that are related to that problem to make that problem eventually solvable, and eventually be able to communicate that value as well as all the different connections. So sometimes I would ask questions like this, like, okay, everyone will come in prepared with like a customer churn. Like, okay, I'm like, customer churn model. They will know everything about how to build the best model. They will like go on all detail. Then I'm like, okay, you built the model. What do you do now? And I think that's the part where I start seeing differentiation in those who have business sense or those who not. Okay, so if I got a model, I magically am now getting for each customer 0.53 or 0.64, whatever score. What do I do with it? Then some people will start thinking, okay, I have to probably group them into buckets, and then the highest one, I will probably do something special. Even that's like, now I understand a little bit more. Or someone will say, no, I will just say yes or no. I'll use a cutoff on that and then categorize people on potential to churn or not, and depending on like that, thinking like that. I'm giving a very simple example. You can actually unfurl it further. That's in my mind is the business understanding, is thinking how would this problem be solved after the modeling and the technical and all aspects are done, or even before modeling and technical everything is started. Can I think about how to kind of think about starting from the original problem up to the end? I don't necessarily think an MBA degree is necessary for it. It requires a little bit of a creativity, I think, in imagination, and also probably just thinking from a user's point of view. If there was a product, right, like thinking from that point of view. In product management interview, which is called like product sense, this is what a kind of that, right? Like how do you think from a user perspective, who will be utilizing the value of these models, and can I speak from that perspective?
Right.
And so I think I'm lucky to I was trained as an engineer. So a lot of engineering discipline and framework actually applies to business sense. Apply to businesses, to product, to project management, etc., etc. It's you are literally taking exact same approach, but putting yourself in another person's shoe and how to optimize it. Right. So if in a modeling perspective, you are optimizing the model to reduce the loss function. In a finance perspective, you are optimizing to increase the IRR. In a product perspective, you are optimizing to create the highest ROI. So it's at the end, it's business sense is how you put yourself in another person's shoes, trying to understand their perspective and think from that perspective. And you use this information to bridge the communication between the two parties. And that eventually, I think, will be super
It's
helpful.
empathy, essentially. I think we call it
I
business
see.
sense. It's empathy.
Right.
So it's very interesting questions. So like if you were to interview a candidate and you want to evaluate if they have a good business sense, so what kind of questions could you ask them?
That is actually a very good question. So usually it's for experienced candidates, it's usually easier because we can go directly into their work experience and listen to their stories. For new grads or people with lesser experience, that is slightly tougher, but this can be observed through the behavioral part of the situation. For example, how do you resolve conflict between, let's say, you and your project, your project partners, or even you and your sibling, or you and your professor or your teacher. Like there is always conflicts that needs to be resolved as long as there's more than one single
Yeah.
person. Or even within yourself, you are resolving different conflicts in how to um, optimize for different outcomes. So this type of thought process can somewhat be observed during the interview process when we talk about different projects.
Yeah.
That say, for example, why do you want to use this loss function versus another? Why did you decide to take on this project versus
Yeah.
another?
I think,
So
yeah, very similar. I think there are two different ways of doing that. One is like if they already have done an academic project, you kind of start, okay, have they framed the problem? How did they come up with the problem statement? Have they talked to all the different stakeholders? And you can kind of see how they collaborated, how they ended up. The other ways that I've done this before, and this is also what Meta, I think, does in kind of product execution interviews, very similar, is introduce the conflict yourself. So let's say they say, okay, this is the best model that I've built. Then you start kind of asking like, why is this the best model? Like, I don't really understand why the value is, and then see how they respond. And are they kind of like going to the technical deep dive and trying to convince me from a technical standpoint, or are they asking open-ended question, discovering why I am even kind of like opposed to it, and putting me to a little bit of a test to come up with actual valid reasons so that they can engage with me. I think that's what I would expect. It's a little bit hard to expect that level of maturity sometimes to new grad candidates, but I think it's a spectrum. Like the more you comfortable you are doing that with, I think it will be easier to kind of like then jump in a random problem and gather people around.
I see. Okay, so in the benefit of time, so I want to move on to the next topic. So one thing is like a lot of people have also asked me, and I would love to hear from the perspective, is like how the risk profile in job has changed for like big companies, like startup, right? So before, for example, like big companies need to be safe options, but given like mass layoffs recently, I'm not sure is this like still the safe options? And I was especially curious to hear from Hans' perspective because Moody's is basically the company just like evaluate risk for different companies, right?
Yeah, I think from a risk perspective, it has not changed much, in my opinion. It has not changed much. Um, so I think over the past couple of years, we did observe quite a bit of hiring frenzy over the past during COVID, and I think some of those ties are somewhat receding, and perhaps some specific companies might have some strategic redirections they are trying to reposition themselves, which impact some of their budget or headcount allocations. But overall, I think it the risk appetite is always going to be dependent on you, the candidate. If you have the choice, or if you are fortunate enough with a choice, then it is a balance between taking a larger, more established company route for a smoother career ride versus going to a startup for a more adventurous route so you can shove all in and just YOLO your way through. So that depends on the risk appetite of each and individual person. And there's not going to be a general framework and say, hey, larger company is the way to go, or startup or scale up are the way to go. It's going to be very different. And it's also depending the uh, on your current life situation as well. So I don't think there is a general rule of thumb as to where to go.
Yeah, I would say like I think this mass layoff thing is new in the tech world, but I feel like if you talk to anyone from JPMC or Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, they will be like, yeah, it happens every year, right? Like, so I think it is more as a, I would say, in the high tech, that Han pointed out, has overhired. There was a big hiring frenzy that was happening for the last 3 years, and that is receding. And that's probably the more prominent observation that people say, okay, well, oh, this is also has risk. But I don't think I agree. I don't think anything big changed in terms of safety net in one versus the other. It's more about what do you want to do, and how do you want to kind of proceed your career. Startups, I think, till now, like I'm biased, justifiably so, that I've been in multiple startups. In my opinion, is still the place probably where you will get a lot of opportunities. You will have a lot of different things that you will do, much quicker exposure. What you do with it, it will depend on your skill set, your gumption, your grit, and whether you're lucky. There is a luck component to all of it. In the bigger organization, the paths a little bit more defined, like, okay, you join in as a L1 and then you do L2 and then you L3 and so on, but it will be kind of predictable and but slow at the same time. And the entry into L1 is probably now going to be, okay, there are lots more supplies in the market, like, okay, how do I kind of mark myself out? But I don't think it's like anything particularly more safe or less safe in this world anymore, because if you were joining like big banks in like a few years ago, it was not going to be safe, even though it's a big bank, if you're not really differentiating yourself, or you're not tied to a product that has a chance of success. That's now it's going to just happening more in high tech as well.
So it's like
And I think just to add, um, we're in the technology world, right? So tech tend to have this
Yeah.
cycle of changing itself every several years or every have every decade or something, right? Back in the 90s, there was a lot of internet and semiconductors, and then it comes networking, and then it comes Web 2.0. Now, who knows what's going to be next? So, what we know, what doesn't change is the change itself. It's always going to change, and in the world of tech, you will always have to reinvent yourself over and over and stay
Yeah.
current and don't stagnant. And that, I think, is the best way to prepare yourself for the future
Yeah.
change that's always
The
going to come.
only unsafe thing is basically when you stop learning and picking up new skills in this world, then definitely that's very unsafe. But other
I
than that,
see.
I think, yeah.
That's also great insight. So curious, like how do you to stay current with what is going on?
There are a lot of good and extraordinary resources online, including Chip's blog. There's also Eugene's blog, and there are various different bloggers. Um, that's super helpful. Even Professor Andrew Yin has his own blog or his newsletter. So subscribing to some of those, or even most of those, will be super helpful. And it's the similar skill set you would need to stay on top of the current research. You do not need to read every single research paper. You can use ChatGPT to help you read papers as well, but just staying on top of things. And I think, given that if you are earlier in the career and you're fresher out of school, a lot of the things that you learned and picked up in school is going to be fairly current. So you don't need to relearn everything to stay on top of things. So imagine this is a continual learning problem where you're just doing a gradient update every week on the
Mm-hmm.
latest news. That should be more than sufficient in staying on top of things versus, every 8 years you need to retrain your whole model, rebuild your whole mental model, moving from like XGBoost to GPT, right?
That's
That's a different training method.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think there are so many materials on LinkedIn. I get a lot of value from LinkedIn specifically by following strong ML influencers and opinion leaders. They're constantly putting out content that are very relevant. Of course, there is some filtering that needs to be done, but when you're starting, getting access and getting following that group and kind of learning on ongoing way is the best place. A lot of newsletters are out there. I don't want to name one or two, but like one very high level industry newsletters comes from Inside AI, very top level summary about all the new things that are coming out in different places of AI. That's kind of like can be a good starting point. Pretty much every software companies right now that are in the ML space active has some content outreach and community stuff going on. I know Hugging Face has one, Weights and Biases, of course, has one, but like other organizations are all, Arize has one. So we are all kind of like contributing to that community, to being part of this community, listening in, seeing what projects other people doing, approaching them to collaborate on those projects. Those are all good point. And once again, I think there is no replacement of doing things on your own. So if you're not playing with you can learn and from the influencer, the communities, all that is good. But then if you're not actually trying things out, and there's so many free tools, so there is really no excuse anymore for trying things out and failing, and then learning from that failure. I think that's probably the most key important thing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And we are just right on time. So before we part, there's a quick question. Like if the audience wants to get in touch with you, what is the best way to do so? Or just never get in touch with you.
For me, you can friend me on LinkedIn or network with on LinkedIn. If you add a note, I will have a good context on how I can help you better. I'm in general, if you have like questions about roles that we have on our website, or if you are interested in knowing any particular type of stuff that you are interested in associated with maybe Weights and Biases or maybe something related, feel free to add that in the note, and then I can definitely help you. Our open roles are all posted on our website, so you can feel free to directly apply if you are interested so much, and we can kind of take it from there. But LinkedIn is, for me, the best possible way to get connected.
You can find me on LinkedIn, Slack. I'm on Arize Slack channel. I'm also on Discord. So yeah, just feel free to reach out. Grab, I guess, a coffee chat or a water cooler chat. It's going to be fun. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you at one of those channels.